Okay, so you've given us all your sources on regret, and we're going to dive deep into them today, pull out the really important stuff so you can get up to speed
Yeah,
really fast.
absolutely.
And today we're talking about regret, something we all deal with, right?
Okay.
But we don't often like sit and really contemplate it.
Definitely not fun to think about.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So we're going to do that for you today.
Absolutely.
And specifically, we're looking at excerpts you sent from Daniel H. Pink's book, The Power of Regret.
That's right.
And we're really going to like dig into his main argument, which is really interesting.
Yeah, so the main argument she's putting forward, I think, is super interesting because it really pushes back against the common wisdom that we should try to live with no regrets.
Right. Like, that's a pretty popular idea, you know?
Yeah, you hear it all the time.
Yeah, just like, oh, don't worry about the past, you know?
Yeah, just move forward.
Yeah, just like, no regrets.
No regrets.
But Pink is saying, actually, no regret is a healthy and universal and even like a really useful part of being human. It can help us figure out what really matters, and it can teach us some pretty valuable lessons.
I mean, it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you never look back and you're never like, oh, I wish I had done that differently. I mean, are you really learning? Are you really growing?
Right. Like, how do you even know what you want?
Yeah, exactly.
If you don't ever look back and be like, oh, I wish I had done that instead.
Right. And he brings up this idea that this no regrets philosophy is so pervasive. Like we've all been kind of, inundated with it.
Yeah, it's everywhere you see it. I mean, there are tons of self-help books.
Oh, tons.
And like posters and memes and everything.
Yeah. And Pink gives these great examples of, celebrities like Norman Vincent Peale.
Right.
Who was a big proponent of positive thinking. And he said things like, leave no room for regrets.
Mm-hmm.
And even Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice.
Yeah, an icon.
An icon. And she said, waste no time on regret.
Right.
So it's coming from these really influential people, this idea that regret is something to just be avoided at all costs.
And it's like not just like influential people. It's like everywhere.
It's everywhere, yeah.
Like you see it in advertising all the time.
It's in songs,
Oh, totally.
It's even like tattoos.
Oh, yeah, he mentions that.
Yeah, he mentions Amber Chase, Morella Batista Germano Tellez.
From all over the world.
All from different parts of the world. And they all have no regrets tattooed on their bodies.
It's a pretty bold statement.
It is.
Like you're really committing to that idea.
Yeah, like this is how I'm going to live my life.
Right. No regrets. But Pink kind of makes you think like, is that even possible?
Right.
Like, is that really realistic?
And that's where he brings up Edith Piaf, right?
Yeah.
The famous French singer.
With that iconic song, Non, je ne regrette rien.
Right.
Which means, no, I regret nothing.
Exactly.
And it's such a powerful song, and she sings it with such conviction.
It's an anthem, right?
Yeah.
For living boldly and not looking back.
But then Pink points out, Piaf's life was actually really tough.
Yeah, she struggled with a lot of challenges.
Yeah, and her reported last words are kind of a stark contrast to that whole no regrets thing.
They're really powerful.
Yeah, she reportedly said, every damn thing you do in this life you have to pay for.
Wow.
So it makes you wonder, what's the real story here?
Right, like, is no regrets just a performance?
Maybe a way to cope with the tough stuff.
Maybe.
But anyway, so Pink argues that regret actually makes us human.
Right, so we've talked about this idea that regret is everywhere.
Yeah.
But then he goes deeper. And he says it's actually a fundamental part of what makes us human.
Like, it's not just something we do. It's like built into us.
Exactly.
Okay, so how does he explain that?
Well, one of the things he talks about is our ability for mental time travel.
Like time travel.
Yeah, but not with a machine.
I got it.
It's like in your mind.
Oh, right.
You know how you can replay a past event in your head and imagine it going differently?
Oh, yeah, I do that all the time.
Yeah, we all do it.
Like, especially after I, like, mess something up. Like, I'm like, oh, I should have said that. Or like, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
And that's exactly what Pink is talking about. He calls it our capacity for fabulism, which is basically our ability to imagine alternative outcomes to what actually happened.
So, like, we can create these what-if scenarios in our minds.
Exactly. And Pink says that's a sign of a really sophisticated human mind.
Because, like, other animals can't do that.
Right. They're kind of stuck in the present moment.
They're just living in the now.
Yeah. But we humans, we can dwell on the past and imagine all these different possibilities.
And that's where regret comes in.
Exactly, because we can compare what actually happened with what we wished had happened.
And he gives that really relatable example from his World Regret Survey
Yeah.
about the woman who wishes she'd gotten a graduate degree
Uh-huh.
instead of doing what her father wanted her to do.
Right. So she had this path not taken.
Yeah.
And that's what she regrets.
So it's really that ability to picture a different path that's at the core of regret.
Yeah. And Pink really emphasizes that regret is not just about wishing things were different. It also involves a sense of personal responsibility.
Like, it's not just, oh, I wish that hadn't happened. It's like, I wish I'd done something differently.
Exactly. He contrasts regret with disappointment.
Oh. Yeah.
So, like, you might be disappointed if your favorite sports team loses,
Oh, yeah.
but you don't really feel regret because you weren't in control of the outcome.
Yeah. I mean, unless you're like the coach
Right.
or like a player on the team.
True.
But if you're just a fan, then yeah, it's just disappointment.
Yeah. But if you make a bad investment decision,
Oh.
that's on you, and that's when you feel regret.
Right, because you could have done something different.
Exactly.
So like being bummed that the Washington Wizards lost another game
yeah.
versus being mad at yourself because you forgot to leave a prize for the tooth fairy.
That's a good example.
They're both like bummer feelings, but one is like, oh, well.
It's out of your control.
Yeah, and the other one is like, they messed up. So, okay, we get that regret is like a human thing, but it's actually kind of shocking how common it is.
Oh, it's everywhere.
Like everybody seems to have regrets.
The numbers are really striking.
Yeah. What did the research show?
Well, Pink mentions this study called the American Regret Project, and they found that 82% of people...
82%.
Yeah, 82% of people occasionally wish they had acted differently.
That's almost everybody.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And other research has shown that regret is the negative emotion that we experience the most frequently.
Wow.
And not only that, we actually value it the most out of all the negative emotions.
So like we don't like feeling it, but we think it's important.
Exactly.
Huh, that's interesting.
And here's where it gets really fascinating.
Okay.
Pink talks about this study of people who have damage to a specific part of their brain.
Like a brain injury.
Yeah. It's called the orbitofrontal cortex.
Okay.
And these individuals, they don't experience regret.
At all.
At all.
Wow.
So the researchers were initially like, oh, maybe this is like a good thing.
Right, like no regrets. That sounds great.
Yeah, like they're free from this burden.
Yeah.
But what they actually concluded is that this lack of regret wasn't a superpower. It was a sign of brain damage.
So like something was wrong.
Yeah, something wasn't working properly.
So regret is actually like a sign of a healthy brain.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
Huh.
Who knew?
It's pretty amazing.
So if regret is like this fundamental part of being human, how does Pink say it makes us better?
Right. So that's the big question, right? If it's so common and it's actually a sign of a healthy brain, what's the point of regret?
Right.
And Pink argues that it's not just this negative emotion that we need to avoid. He says it can actually help us grow and improve.
Okay, so how?
Well, he talks about this concept called counterfactual thinking.
Counterfactual thinking.
Yeah, it's basically those if-onlys and at leasts that pop into our minds after something happens.
Oh, yeah, like, if only I had studied harder for that test.
Exactly. Or at least I didn't fail.
Right.
And Pig says that these thoughts, even though they can be painful, are actually really important for learning and growth.
Okay, but like, how are if-onlys helpful?
Well, he points out that if-onlys are more likely to lead to future improvement.
Because you're like identifying what you could have done differently.
Exactly. You're focusing on how you could have changed the outcome.
Whereas with at leasts, you're just kind of like relieved that it wasn't worse.
Right. You're not necessarily motivated to change anything.
Okay, that makes sense.
And he uses this really interesting example of Olympic medalists.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about this.
Have you?
Yeah.
So the idea is that bronze medalists are often happier than silver medalists.
Which seems counterintuitive.
It does. Right, because you'd think silver is better than bronze.
Yeah, like you're closer to gold.
Right. But Pink explains that this has to do with the type of counterfactual thinking each medalist is engaging in.
So the silver medalists are like, if only I had done this one thing differently, I could have won gold.
Exactly. They're focused on what they could have done better.
Yeah, and the bronze medalists are like, at least I got a medal. I could have come in fourth and gotten nothing.
Right. So they're focusing on how things could have been worse.
But it's those if-onlys for the silver medalists that can be a really powerful motivator.
Yeah, because they're thinking about how they can improve for next time.
So it's that little twinge of regret that pushes us to learn from our mistakes and do better in the future.
Yeah, exactly it.
Pink calls this improving our decision hygiene.
Yeah, it's like washing our hands before we eat.
Okay.
We're trying to prevent future problems.
So regret helps us make better decisions
Regret.
by making us more careful and thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
He even mentions a study of CEOs who were asked to reflect on their past regrets.
Yeah, and what they found is that it actually improved the quality of their future decisions.
So like they learn from their mistakes.
That's the idea.
Okay, so regret isn't just about avoiding future screw-ups.
Right.
It can actually make our lives more meaningful.
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds kind of crazy.
It does, but Pink makes a really compelling case.
Okay, so how does regret make life more meaningful?
Well, he suggests that when we engage in this counterfactual reflection,
Those if-onlys and at leasts.
exactly,
Yeah,
the choices we actually made and the relationships we have become more significant.
because we're thinking about what could have been.
Yeah, like we're appreciating what we have more because we're aware of the alternative.
Okay, that makes sense.
And there's actually a study from Northwestern University that supports this.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they found that when college students were asked to reflect on their choice of college and their friendships through these if-only lenses,
Okay.
they actually ended up feeling a deeper sense of meaning and connection to their actual experiences.
So like they were more grateful for what they had.
Exactly.
It's like you don't really appreciate something until you think about losing it.
Right.
And Pink shares that really touching story about Abby Henderson,
Oh, yeah.
who regretted not spending more time with her grandparents.
That's a powerful story.
Yeah, it really got to me.
So Abby's regret about her grandparents ended up becoming a really positive force in her life.
Because it motivated her to connect more deeply with her own parents.
Exactly. She didn't want to repeat that regret.
Yeah, she and her siblings even gave their dad a subscription to Storyworth,
Oh, yeah.
which is that service where you answer these questions and it gets turned into a book.
Yeah, it's a really cool way to preserve family stories.
Yeah. So Abby's regret about her grandparents actually led to her dad sharing all these amazing stories with his family.
It's a beautiful example of how regret can inspire positive action.
Totally. And Pink also brings up Mara Abbott's experience in the 2016 Olympic road race,
Oh, yes.
where she was like so close to winning.
So close.
And then she got passed right at the very end.
It was heartbreaking.
Yeah. And Pink's point is that a near miss like that
Uh-huh.
can actually be more motivating than a clear win.
Yeah, because with a near miss, you're filled with those if-onlys.
Right.
You're thinking about all the things you could have done differently.
Whereas with a win, you're more likely to just be relieved and maybe a little complacent. And Pink even mentions a study funded by the NIH that found that scientists who just barely missed out on getting a grant
Oh, wow.
actually ended up outperforming those who just barely got it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So like the regret of missing out fueled their future efforts.
It's like they had something to prove,
Right.
and that drove them to work harder.
So we've talked about how regret is a human thing and how it can actually make us better.
Uh-huh.
But Pink doesn't stop there.
No, he goes even deeper.
He talks about the deep structure of regret.
Yes, this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, so what's the deep structure?
Well, it's not just about the surface level things we regret, like a specific career move or a fight with a friend.
Right. It's like there's a deeper pattern to our regrets.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Pink proposes that underneath those everyday regrets, there are 4 core categories.
4 core categories?
Yeah, like 4 fundamental types of regret that most of us experience.
Okay, so what are they?
Well, the first one he calls foundation regrets.
Foundation regrets.
Yeah, and these are regrets that come from failures of foresight and conscientiousness.
So like not thinking ahead.
Yeah, and not be responsible or prudent.
Okay.
It's about neglecting the foundations of a good life.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, things like your finances, your health, your education,
Oh, yeah.
like the basic building blocks of a stable and fulfilling life.
And he uses Jason Drent's story as an example here.
Oh, yeah. Jason's story is really compelling.
Yeah, he was really successful in his career.
Very successful.
But he regretted not saving money consistently.
Yeah, from the beginning of his career.
So like he made a lot of money, but he didn't keep much of it.
Right, and Pink connects this to Aesop's fable of the ant and the grasshopper.
Oh, yeah, the ant works hard all summer and the grasshopper just plays.
Exactly, and then winter comes and the grasshopper has nothing.
Right, and the ant is all set.
Yeah, and this is what Pink calls temporal discounting.
Temporal discounting.
Yeah, it's this tendency we have to overvalue immediate rewards at the expense of our future well-being.
So like we choose the cookie now over the healthy body later.
Exactly. And with foundation regrets, we often don't realize the power of compounding until it's too late.
Compounding.
Yeah, like with savings, the earlier you start, the more your money grows over time.
Right.
And the same thing with health.
Like if you take care of yourself when you're young, you're more likely to be healthy when you're older.
Exactly. But it's hard to see that when you're young and you just want to have fun.
Yeah, instant gratification.
That's the problem.
And Pink also mentions this foundation attribution error.
Yeah, this is an important point.
So what's that about?
Well, it's this idea that we might be too quick to blame our own personal feelings for our foundation regrets.
Like we're too hard on ourselves.
Yeah, without considering the external factors that might have played a role.
So like maybe you grew up in a family where saving money wasn't emphasized?
Exactly. Or maybe you had some health challenges that were out of your control.
Right, so it's not always just about personal responsibility.
It's about looking at the whole picture.
Okay, so foundation regrets are about the long-term stuff.
Yeah, the building blocks of a good life.
What's the second type of core regret?
The second one is boldness regrets.
Boldness regrets.
Yeah, and these are the regrets we have about not taking chances or speaking up for ourselves.
Like playing it too safe?
Exactly.
Okay.
And these regrets are often driven by fear.
Like fear of what?
Well, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of rocking the boat.
So like we let fear hold us back from doing what we really want to do?
Yeah, and Pink gives this really relatable example of a closed door regret.
Closed door.
Yeah, it's from Bruce's story about missing a potential connection on a train.
Oh, yeah.
He saw this woman he was interested in, but he hesitated. And then she got off the train and he never saw her again.
And he's like, what if?
Exactly. What if I had just said hello?
Right.
And that's a classic boldness regret.
Like the opportunity was there, but you didn't take it.
And now the door's closed.
And Pink points out that boldness regrets aren't just about romantic opportunities. They can be about anything where we hold ourselves back.
Yeah, like not speaking up for what we believe in.
Or not pursuing a dream job.
Exactly.
And he mentions that it's surprisingly common for people to regret being too introverted.
Yeah, like they wish they had been more outgoing and assertive.
So boldness regrets are really about not living up to our full potential.
Yeah, and not being true to ourselves.
Okay, what about the third type of core regret?
That would be moral regrets.
Moral regrets.
Yeah, these are the regrets we have when we feel we've behaved badly.
Like we've done something wrong.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's about violating our own moral code or harming others.
So like guilt and shame.
Yeah, those emotions are definitely involved.
And Pink brings in the work of Jonathan Haidt here.
Yes, Haidt is a moral psychologist.
Okay.
And he's done a lot of research on how people make moral judgments.
And what's the connection to regret?
Well, Haidt argues that our moral compass is often intuitive.
Like we just know what's right and wrong.
Yeah, and that it's not just about harm and fairness.
There's more to it than that.
Yeah, he identifies 6 moral foundations.
6?
Yeah, harm, fairness, loyalty, authority, sanctity, and liberty.
Wow.
And these foundations can be prioritized differently across cultures.
So what's right in one culture might be wrong in another.
Exactly.
Okay, that's interesting.
And Pink gives some examples of moral regrets that relate to these different foundations.
Okay, like what?
Well, it talks about Steve's regret about bullying a classmate named Ziggy in middle school.
Oh yeah, that's a classic harm-related regret.
Yeah, like you feel bad because you hurt someone.
And he also mentions regrets about infidelity.
Which are very common.
Yeah, those touch on fairness and loyalty.
Exactly.
And then he gives the example of Charlie, who regrets not serving in the military.
Which relates to loyalty and duty.
Right.
And Pink also talks about regrets related to abortion, which for some people violate the sanctity of life.
So there are all these different ways we can experience moral regret.
Yeah, depending on our values and beliefs.
Okay, so we've got foundation regrets, boldness regrets, and moral regrets.
Sorry.
The fourth and final core regret.
That would be connection regrets.
Connection regrets.
Yeah, and these are the regrets that come from relationships that have frayed or broken.
Like with family or friends.
Yeah, spouses, partners, family members, friends, colleagues.
Any kind of relationship that's important to us.
Exactly.
And Pink uses Cheryl Johnson's story as an example here.
Yeah, Cheryl and Jen were best friends.
Yeah.
But then they drifted apart.
Just like that.
Yeah, it wasn't a big fight or anything, just a gradual fading of contact.
And now Cheryl regrets it?
She does.
And Pink makes this distinction between rifts and drifts in relationships.
Yeah, he says that rifts are easier to repair.
Because there's like a specific event you can address.
Exactly.
But drifts are harder.
Yeah, because it's more like a slow erosion of the relationship.
Right.
And there's not always a clear starting point.
And Pink talks about this fear of awkwardness.
Yeah.
That prevents us from reaching out to people we've lost touch with.
Like we're afraid it'll be weird.
Yeah. Or that they won't want to hear from us.
But Pink points out that we often overestimate how awkward it will be.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that people generally appreciate the effort,
Even if it's been a long time.
even if it's been years.
Huh, that's good to know.
And he mentioned some research on conversations with strangers,
Okay.
which found that people actually enjoy talking to strangers more than they expect to.
Really?
Yeah, and the same thing with giving compliments.
People like getting compliments.
They do,
Even from strangers?
even from strangers.
Oh, okay.
So it's not as scary as we think it is
Right.
to reach out to someone.
And Pink emphasizes how important strong relationships are for our well-being.
Oh, yeah.
He even talks about the Harvard Grant study.
Which is this really long-term study of human happiness.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
And their main conclusion was happiness is love. Full stop.
Wow. That's pretty powerful.
It is.
And it's interesting that Pink found that in his World Regret Survey,
Yeah.
there were relatively few regrets about having children,
Yeah, which is surprising.
but tons of regrets about partners.
Yeah, it really shows how important those close relationships are.
Okay, so we've got these 4 core types of regret.
Uh-huh.
What does Pink suggest we do with all these feelings?
Right, because it's one thing to identify our regrets, but what do we do with them?
Yeah, how do we deal with them in a healthy way?
Well, Pink lays out a 3-step process for transforming regret.
3 steps.
Yeah. Step 1 is self-disclosure.
Self-disclosure.
Yeah. And this simply means talking or writing about your regrets.
Like getting it all out.
Exactly. And there's actually a lot of research to support this.
Really?
Yeah, James Pennebaker's done a lot of work on this.
Go.
And he's found that expressing difficult emotions,
Like through writing or talking.
exactly,
Yeah.
can have huge benefits for both our mental and physical health.
So it's like journaling or therapy,
Exactly.
and specifically about regrets.
Yeah, focusing on those feelings of regret and getting them out in the open.
And Pink suggests some practical exercises for this.
Yeah, like spending a few days writing about a specific regret or talking to someone you trust about it.
So step 1 is self-disclosure.
Uh-huh.
Step 2 is self-compassion.
Self-compassion.
And this is where it gets tricky,
Yeah, for a lot of us, it's really hard to be kind to ourselves.
especially when we feel like we've messed up.
Exactly, but that's the whole point of self-compassion.
It's like giving yourself a break.
Yeah,
Yeah?
it's about treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding you would offer to a friend in a similar situation.
So like if your friend told you they were regretting something, you wouldn't be like, you idiot.
No, you'd be supportive and understanding,
Right.
and that's how we need to treat ourselves.
Easier said than done.
It is, but it's really important.
And Pink mentions the work of Kristen Neff here.
Yeah, Neff is a leading researcher on self-compassion,
Okay.
and she's identified 3 key components of self-compassion.
What are they?
Well, first, there's self-kindness,
Yeah.
which is basically treating yourself with warmth and understanding. Then there's recognizing our common humanity.
So like realizing that everyone makes mistakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And finally, there's mindfulness.
Which is like being present with your feelings without judgment.
Exactly.
Okay. So self-compassion is about being nice to yourself,
Yeah.
even when you feel like you don't deserve it.
Especially when you feel like you don't deserve it.
Okay, what's the third and final step?
The third step is self-distancing.
Self-distancing.
Yeah. And this is about creating some space between yourself and the regret.
So like not getting too caught up in it.
Exactly.
Okay.
And Pink suggests a few ways to do this.
Like what?
Well, one way is to imagine how you might view this regret in the future.
So like 5 or 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another way is to think about it from a broader perspective.
Like zoom out.
Yeah.
Okay.
And Pink even suggests using third-person pronouns when reflecting on the situation.
Like instead of saying, I feel so bad about this, you could say, she feels so bad about this.
Exactly.
Huh.
It sounds a little strange,
Yeah.
but it can actually be really helpful.
Because it creates a little bit of distance.
Yeah, you're not as emotionally invested.
Okay, so self-distancing is about getting some perspective on the regret.
Exactly.
And Pink also talks about using anticipated regret as a tool for making better decisions.
Yeah, this is a really interesting concept.
So how does it work?
Well, it involves thinking ahead to how you might feel in the future if you make a certain choice.
So like if I'm thinking about skipping the gym,
Uh-huh.
I might imagine how I'll feel later if I do skip it.
Exactly. And if you anticipate feeling regretful,
Then maybe I'll go to the gym.
right, and Pink talks about these things called regret lotteries.
Regret lotteries.
Yeah, it's this idea that people are more likely to take an action if they imagine the regret of missing out on a potential reward.
So like FOMO.
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
And this is related to what's known as loss aversion.
Loss aversion.
Yeah, which is this psychological principle that says the pain of losing something often feels more intense than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value.
So we're more motivated to avoid loss than to achieve gain.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, it's interesting.
But Pink also cautions against relying too heavily on anticipated regret.
Because it can backfire.
Yeah, sometimes it can make us too cautious or even lead to irrational decisions.
So, like, you might pass up a good opportunity.
Yeah, because you're too afraid of regretting it later.
Right.
So it's about finding a balance
Okay.
between using anticipated regret as a tool and not letting it paralyze you.
Got it.
And Pink also touches on the difference between maximizers and satisficers.
Maximizers and satisficers.
Yeah, it's about how people approach decision-making.
Okay.
So maximizers are people who always strive for the absolute best option.
Like they want the perfect outcome.
Exactly.
Okay.
And satisficers are people who are content with a good enough option.
So they're not as obsessed with finding the best?
Right.
And how does this relate to regret?
Well, Pink suggests that maximizers might be more prone to feeling regret even after making a good choice.
Because they're always thinking about what could have been better.
Exactly.
Whereas satisficers are more likely to just be happy with what they have.
And move on.
Okay, so understanding your decision-making style can help you manage your regrets.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, Pink's book is packed with insights.
What's the main takeaway you want to leave us with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that regret is not something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, we all have regrets.